Terrell, thank you for being here on Monday with all of us again. And these co-creations, I think, are extremely important for us to bring our voices of experience to the community because they're getting a lot of mixed messages. And I think the most important ones we're going to talk about tonight are three items like how we live here in the middle of barrages of missiles and attacks, and what it's like. What do we do in that situation? Air defense, and then some events that happened this week. So as I watch your videos when you post about attacks that we're having at night, and I know people tell you, like they tell me, go to the bunker, go to the get underground, get safe. Talk about that a little bit about what it's like for us who lived here for all these days of war and doing that in the middle of the night.
Most of the people who are saying run to the shelter are not in Ukraine. And a lot of these people project their own fears about why we're here in the first place and what they would do. However,
Hmm.
they have not lived here to the point where you just get used to things, because the longer you live in a place, the more your psychology adjusts to the realities of it. So
Hmm.
if they were living here long enough, there would be things that they would, I wouldn't say brush off, but they would definitely not have the same type of fear as they do when they're not. So I've spoken a lot about going to shelters, and they obviously make sense. I I just don't do it regularly.
Hmm.
There will be a point when I think I probably will do it, but I think if I wanted to be safe, I wouldn't be in Ukraine. So it's one of those things
Yeah.
where, yeah, it's one of those things where I just don't do things that are blatantly stupid. So I wouldn't go to a frontline city, for example, and let's just say Kherson, right? A
Running
place,
up and down the streets and here's someone with your
right?
camera.
You see what I'm saying? Like running around my camera, because for those who don't know, Kherson is it's a very netted place, and it's called a safari. They call it safari for a reason when you're going out to get a bottle of milk or what have you. Um,
Yeah.
those are so when I talk about safety, yeah, I would definitely manage my behavior differently. But in Kyiv, when you're talking about a shelter, it doesn't. But I'll tell you what's really interesting too is that everyone's mental and their psychology is different. There are people here who kind of brave it, or it doesn't really get to them in a particular way. But there are a lot of people who have panic attacks. There are people who who
Who
can't
move
sleep.
every time there is one. There are people who literally every time there's an option to move, they get up and go to the thing,
Yeah,
no
but
matter
why be
how
here?
exhausting that is for them, right?
So if you're a Ukrainian, you can't help that, right?
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you're an American, I know, speaking for myself,
Sure.
if I was so scared that I went to the shelter where there's no reliable internet, where I'm around
Mhm.
people I don't know, where I'm not in the comfort of my home, I would just go back to New York. So that's all I have to say about that. I mean, well, not all I have to say, but that's just my general synopsis of it.
Well, let me use a comparative you'll find sadly, ironically funny, is that a person we both know in New York area. I'm sure you know the same person. Anyway, this guy, he's a good media guy. He says, "Are you safe? Hope you're safe there." I said, "Am I in a church or a grocery store in America or a school or a, And I just ran down the list of places that get gunned down and Dylan Roof stories. I had just have a huge head full of terrible things in America. He goes, "No, no, I'm in Ukraine." Oh, shit, and he called me, like, 10 minutes later, he goes, "Dude, the way you just leveled me of the difference in the safety problems in America and what you guys deal with, it really cemented home the dangers in America, right? That you go to the grocery store. 'Cause I've actually had a talk with a woman who wanted me to take her to America, a Ukrainian date, and I was like, "Chomul," and I showed her pictures of me covering mass terror events in America, like, "Do you go to the grocery store like Silpo and someone guns you down?" No. Although we did have the attack, several months ago in Holosivska, which was a terror attack, very similar to that, Russian, by the way. Um, and
Yeah, but it's
similarly,
not local. It was Russian, right?
Right. One event, strange
And it
event,
wasn't local.
and that's it. Yeah, exactly. Wasn't a guy within the community. He'd been lurking for a while. But that's, as I said to her, the enemy is perceivably outside. In America, you don't know where the enemy's going to come up. It's just someone who lost their shit that day. So we don't have that. The air defense issue is a huge deal because, like the other night when we had the latest salvo, Sean Penner was here that night because we were doing the rally, which we'll talk also about. And there was one intercept out of all the 31 missiles that came flying, and only one intercept. And then Donald Trump basically flips from, we'll help out to, yeah, I don't think so. You'll use it against us.
The thing of one, when you're living in Ukraine, you get accustomed to if a missile is intercepted or if it hits. Because if it hits, you feel it. Like there's a
Hmm.
rumble, right? And
Hmm.
depending on where in the city you are, you're going to feel it even more. And then you can also see the flash in the sky.
Right.
That's another thing. So we know when there's a direct hit on some facility or wherever, whatever the target is, and people, right now, I think people are really feeling like we just hope that when these missiles hit, that they just hit critical infrastructure and that they don't hit buildings because they're going to hit something.
Yeah.
And a lot, and the last one, I think around 9 to 10 people were killed, and you have people who were injured.
Right.
Um, but what another thing that is
Not, by the way,
interesting,
not for the viewers, not far from me. It's actually right across the highway. I'm in Osikorki area, Poznanki, but our general area is called Darnitsi. And so if you go across the
yeah,
highway and you keep walking, it's about a foot, it'd be about 40 minutes walk, but 40 minutes walk is not really that far. And
it's far for Americans.
yeah, far for Americans, it's very local for us. And two of the people who were killed were actually attempting to get to a shelter, which ties back to the first issue, is that they were already in the middle of doing it. There was no drone swath that would kind of like that few hours where we used to have drones around before we had missiles. And at that point, you're sort of making decisions. It's pretty much air raid, boom. And so if you're already making decisions, you've already got danger everywhere. And that's what happened. We lost two in a double tap as well.
But just imagine the whole process of going to a shelter hours in advance. And that's the reason why people go hours ahead before anything happens. So if the missiles or drones are anticipated to get to your area at 1 o'clock, that means that people are at the shelters at 10.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it sucks
Yeah.
because first let's even talk about, because you asked the question about about the interceptors and Trump and all that, but I think it's important to know, how do you prepare to even go to a shelter? So
Right.
a lot of us have go bags, and a go bag has your essentials like, drink, like your water. You also need a sleeping bag, and you
Right.
need a foam. You need that foam thingy that you put under as your base because you can't have the sleeping bag directly on the ground, and because some people do. But basically, it's like going camping. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a type of camping, but as opposed to going into the woods or the forest, you're going to be camping in a metro. What is good about camping in the Ukrainian metro is that it's not dirty like New York City. Could you imagine
It's
having to sleep
clean
under,
here. Yeah.
right? Can you imagine having to sleep and put any part of your body, no matter how many layers between the ground and you are there, sleeping in a dog on New York City train
Yeah.
station?
Yeah.
But when you talk about these, um, about Trump, you can never trust anything he says. He's pretty flimsy. I never expected Trump to follow through on giving Ukraine a license in order to build Patriots. I don't think that Trump had any thought or any type of consideration as to why he would allow Kyiv to build these missiles in the first place. I just think it was something very random. I don't think that he talked with anyone about it. I think that his staff were surprised. when he
Hmm.
said it. And who knows, maybe someone talked him out of it or said that technically this is going to be a
Do you
lot
think
more
there was a
difficult.
call from his buddy Vladimir? Maybe.
I, I don't, with Trump, yes, that's a possibility. But what the track record shows us is that he just says things.
Right. Right.
So, I'm,
Impulse.
yeah, yeah, it's one of those things where I don't think that there's any big conspiracy or coordination. Like Putin must have called him because the whole premise is that Trump, there are a wide range of conspiracies that Trump is involved in. I think I'm not a conspiracy theorist just in general. Kind of like when people say Trump coordinated these assassination attempts in order to build his popularity. I just think that
Mm-hmm.
the people around his security apparatus are incompetent. I don't think it's any more than that. And it's just the same thing with the air defense, with the air defense and the Patriots. I don't
Right.
think I don't think anyone like Putin or called him to say, "Hey, you need to reverse course." I think that he was sitting with Zelensky and randomly it just popped out of his head. And then I don't even necessarily think that it took anyone to convince him not to do it. I just think he randomly thought, "Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore."
It's really very well within his complex. And I've said that the one thing that people keep saying about him being compromised and that Russians have something on him is I don't think he matters. I don't think he cares about that. I think what he has is a worldview that buys into the Malorussia concept, the big country, big boat, little boat. Uh, way of looking at the world that big boats and are entitled to do whatever they want because that's why they're big, and that's as sophisticated as his worldview gets. He says things that reaffirm that very simple view of power. And you and I know that if you actually know Ukrainian soldiers or Ukrainian society, that is not where power is. That's the misconception,
True.
and that's the problem. And so he keeps doing that. And before we go too far, I wanted to say, like you've done before, we have a lot of viewers here, and I want to thank there's a whole lot of names, so I'm just going to say generically to everyone that's here because I'm seeing all your names.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. We really appreciate you being here. We really enjoy being able to
Mhm.
bring quality conversation about the country we live in and the policies we're concerned with to those of you who are really tuned in. And I think you and I've said this before, but Substack, like, it's a higher grade of intellect paying attention, and we need that. We need to be focused
It's
on. So
not
thank you to
Twitter.
everyone
It's,
who's
it's,
here.
it's not Elon Musk X.
Yeah, and by the way, my Facebook page, since we last talked, my Facebook page got seized by Facebook as I'm inauthentic. Actually, so did my Facebook account. But then when I showed them who I was, it's like, let it take multiple pictures left, right, forward. It goes, oh, well, now you have your account back. But your page, not so much. Like, I'm inauthentic, yeah, because I'm speaking English inside of a Ukrainian country, or like it's really weird. But this platform so far, we're at least safe.
Yeah.
Sticking to the situation with the missiles and the attacks. One of the things that I think that people need to be aware of is that, um, like Adam Kinzinger talked about this. He was saying that America gave all of its long range stuff to Ukraine, and you and I know that didn't happen. We never got Tomahawks. We never got ATACMS that were going to do anything long distance. And we finally
Mm.
got ATACMS that were told to launch them locally, had to be in Crimea only. At the end of Biden administration, there was finally a little clearance to hit a little bit in Russia territory, but mostly not. And that arsenal was never touched. And the Kiel Institute releases data that shows what's sent, what's not sent. It's not a perfect ledger because there are countries who won't exactly share, but it's a pretty close ledger. And I've pored over those numbers so much. The the Republican Party refused to vote for the type of bills that would replenish those, that would keep them focused, all for Donald Trump, just to keep Donald Trump happy. And then there was I think there was no more depth to their rationale than that. And now they're up there like, we don't have any munitions. We don't have anything to defend ourselves, which is simply not true.
Yeah. So what's really ironic about the Republicans not passing this legislation that would replenish these stockpiles is that aren't these people highly financed by the military and defense industries and a lot
I
of
thought
these
so.
industries? Yeah. And so I would assume the opposite that they would be advocating for, but it just shows you just the randomness of how these decisions are made, because it has nothing to do with security. Because let's just think about this that was started in Iran,
Hmm.
and how many Patriot missiles and other air defenses that are being wasted fighting that war.
900.
Yeah,
They've
but not
less
only
than
that though.
900.
Yeah, but also because America doesn't know how to fight in a modernized war, and American military is smart. Well, like, I'm not worried. I don't have these same worries about if America were to start a World War III, that we would be at a
Hmm.
major disadvantage. And not really. I don't believe that. I think that America
Right.
would catch up a bit. Like if America had to fight Russia, for example, I think,
Right.
like they will win easily even without NATO. I just think that we're smart. We'll catch up. But damn,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think that it's really it really shows you how far how far gone and how much the Republican Party has deteriorated. Could you imagine
Hmm.
if a Reagan-like person was presiding over the party right now? How this would be carried out? Or even somebody like John McCain, if that type of Republican aura were the Democratic Party today, and this would be a completely different situation. In all these military companies would be producing as many Patriot systems and whatever as they could.
Right.
But
Right.
I but Ukraine ultimately is suffering from America's utter incompetence. That's really the main line. It's incompetence and dysfunction. Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah. In a minute, we'll talk about what Ukraine's doing about it, because we've had some very active streets over the dismissal of Fedorov, which we'll get to in a minute. But one of the things that's happened recently with Laura Loomer coming here is that, again, we have this Republican voice that I don't doubt that they're Ukraine supporters. There's a lot of them. They're on Twitter, they're on YouTube, and they
Mhm.
keep making this argument about Biden this or the Democrats that or somewhere else. That, like, a guy named JP Lindsley, who everyone knows I despise, says, all of you who are criticizing Laura Loomer, it's your fault. And what I've said, and even
Why?
gotten
Why is it our
pretty
fault?
hard, because we didn't go out and make MAGA love Ukraine, because we didn't go out, because we're such pious lefties, practically communists or whatever the fuck he thinks, that we didn't reach across the aisle to the people who need to be converted. And my view is this: that's your caucus. I've already tried to talk to those people. They're not listening to me. If you're in that caucus and that's your people, you go talk to your people. Your caucus is the one that's failing. I'm not even a Democrat. So if I don't have to go to even the squad who voted for the last aid packages, even though it had billing for Israel, no less. That cemented it right there. I was like, you mean? And I was totally expecting that I'd have four, maybe 4 or 5 Democrats who some reason couldn't do it, and they didn't. They voted for the packages, and then registered the
Democrats are
complaint
more
about Israel.
pro-Ukraine than Republicans.
Right. And so 51% voting against. My beef with that other caucus is that you're the ones who are sabotaging both America's security and Ukraine. And then number two, you're lying about it and you're shifting the blame away from yourselves, because you're the ones that are stalling everything. You're the ones that keep running up the tab, because it's like I compared the war to a fire. If you don't put out the fire, you're going to have to still deal with the fire. Your ambition should be to put out the fire, not to get halfway through the garage being put out and go, I don't know, maybe the house. It's kind of mostly gone, isn't it now? Oh, it's not completely gone? Yeah, but I don't know about the water. That's really what they sound like to me.
Yeah,
It sounds
and
completely stupid.
indeed, Donald Trump Jr. back in 2022
Mhm.
referred to Ukrainians as international welfare twins.
Exactly.
And he said this after Zelensky spoke before Congress and asked for more military aid. And basically, Trump, his sons, and MAGA in general were spouting off these lies that Ukraine was draining America and that poor working class people, translation, white people, were being stiffed because the Ukrainians were taking all of their money. And even though from a budget line standpoint, it's an infinitesimal number that is coming out of the overall American budget,
Right.
um, let alone even the defense budget. And so this has none of this has anything to do with defense. This is about a bunch of racist people who are saying the more money that we take away from the world and put it into your pockets, which is not happening, by the way,
Hmm.
the better you're going to be. And whoever is saying that MAGA needs to be, you need to reach out to MAGA, I think that's stupid because these people are not interested in anything other than white hegemony and keeping immigrants, whether they are documented or not, out of the country. They're invested in their own racism.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I really don't care about that. And what's really interesting was JP. I mean, I've met him a few times, and
Yeah.
he put some of the most racist shit on his posts. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
remember, I mean, I stopped following him, but what really made me stop following him was how he talked about the killing of Irina Zarutska.
Correct.
And the way and the way that the photo was positioned, everything, it
And
was just
why they got outraged? Because you and I both know they didn't give a fuck about her being Ukrainian.
right. But they were,
She was a white
but
blonde girl is all they saw. White blonde girl. Oh, that's enough.
and that's enough. And here's the thing: as a black man, you want me to be cool with you when you post that shit, and
Exactly.
that right. And so, but anybody should be outraged by the way that those type of things are posted. But
Yeah.
him, I mean, like I said, I met him a few times, affable enough in person, but like when you post that shit online, I'm like, why the fuck am I going to engage that?
Right. Right.
So yeah, but that's just really the norm of, but that's just a typical MAGA norm, man. And I think that until a Democrat is elected to the White House again, Ukrainians are going to continue to suffer. Let's just say hypothetically that Marco Rubio is the nominee, and let's just say
Right.
hypothetically he wins. I think that he's going to be so emboldened to MAGA
Yeah.
that even his formerly hawkish, Ru- uh, Russian hawkish ways are not going to come out because he's a coward. Even though I
Yeah.
don't think he's a dumb man at all, he's a coward. So I just think that the Republican Party is going to be tainted for years to come, and it's going to hurt Ukraine along with our other international relationships.
Well, one thing I'm curious about from your experience that I couldn't possibly have in this is that you have a long view of Ukraine from many years being here. And I want to know a little bit of how you see the class of, I want to say just commentators, influencers, however, that arrived after 2022 to divine all their great insight for Ukraine. And essentially, especially because I'm harping on the right wing side mainly, how bad it is, for you who covers this area, not just Ukraine, but as we've discussed before, you know a lot of the region, and you also have a good
Hmm.
sense of the history from being up close, where all of a sudden everyone arrived, and I want to thank you in front of everyone to say one of the things I got better, or I should say I seem to get right. I'm not sure if I get it right, but I know I was driven by was I always remember that you'd been here for a long time, and I found myself like mapping my way in contextually instead of just walking, oh, I'm here now, and just kind of blinders up and
Hmm.
slowing down a little bit and just kind of like feeling out the room, seeing who knows who, and eventually people tell me I kind of get it right. Ukrainians, which is mainly the audience I would want to have any kind of validation from. Um, but when I see the news coverage as I harp to my crowd, it's horrible. And we have all these experts and YouTube accounts and podcasts, and none of them were talking about Ukraine until after 2022. And some of them even popped up halfway in the middle, and they're like, "I'm an expert, and I have 100,000 views," and you're just that guy Chris who's got an attitude problem in Kyiv. But you've been here a long time. What do you think of really how the coverage has been when it comes to getting the aid?
I think the coverage there are two things happening: the way that Ukraine is covered, excuse me, and the kind of consumer interest in it. I
Mm-hmm.
think
Okay.
I think where a corner was turned happened around April 2022, when people realized that Ukraine, or particularly Kyiv, stood and it wasn't going to fall. And because of that, people didn't really have a reason to keep following. So, just in general,
Mm,
covering stories like this is really difficult to keep in the public eye. So, one of the few stories that was able to keep Americans' attention for a fairly sustainable amount of time was the Iraq War, the second one under
right, right. Yeah.
under Bush Jr. And that was because it was American lives. It was because America is the superpower, et cetera. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then you had the Brits who were involved. Because, by the way, a lot of people think that NATO was behind the Second Iraq War. That's not true. In fact, most of the NATO
Right,
countries said no. And then you had a
right,
few
right.
like the UK, and I believe that Poland participated. Right, I think they did to a certain extent. Because you remember
Mm-hmm.
even the Turks were like, you can't use our airspace, all this other stuff. But anyway, it's just difficult in general to maintain that type of attention. And Ukraine had it for about 2 months, and that was a while. And
Mm-hmm.
so as soon as people realized that Kyiv is going to hold and Russians can't take it, slowly moved on. And then you had a year or so later, you had the October 7th attacks. So now here's the coverage of it. There's a couple of things that I saw,
Yeah.
and again, this is particularly from my perspective and my lens and that of my friends, because I'm a Black man and live a Black life. It's I found it troubling how commentators in major news networks had this emotional draw to
Mm-hmm.
Ukrainians and kids, primarily because they look like their own. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they didn't have the same heart and compassion and emotion towards anyone else, whether it be
Right.
people in the Middle East, whether it
Mm.
be, the continent of Africa. They just didn't care. And
Amen.
even though I was here and I experienced the explosions, was almost killed multiple times, there are few people that have as much heart for Ukraine as I do. Like, I'm here, I'm putting all my resources and energy in this.
Yeah.
But just as a Black man, the way that news hosts would show empathy for them
Mm-hmm.
showed me that they can do this for other countries but they don't, because it's not a priority for theirs and it for them, and it doesn't care. And it made me wonder,
Mm.
how would I be covered
Mm.
if something were to
Exactly.
happen to me? How would the narrative be focused in? Who would be speaking up for me? And a lot of these people who cheer me on for supporting Ukraine, would they be at a march protesting if a cop were to abuse me or something like that? Right. So it as much joy that I had about Ukraine getting the support, there was just a lot of racism in it, and it was very painful to see to see how Africans who were fleeing were talked about. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
versus Ukrainian refugees. Because
And you were one of
again,
the, I told people a lot of times, I told a lot of people over the last couple of years, if you want the best commentary on that coverage from someone who literally looked into it, who had the perfect voice on it, talk to Terrell.
yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
you
yeah,
took it head on.
and I'm continuing to do work on that right now.
Right,
So
right.
my answer that I'm giving you is not typical, because I think it's a deeper lens, and I think ultimately it doesn't. I think that the racism with which people were covering Ukraine, and I would say a lot of people, it was unintentional. I really believe that as well. I think there are just a lot
Mhm.
of biases in how Ukraine was covered, but it ultimately doesn't help them because you really don't get to learn. You really, it's kind of like a surface level thing. Like, these are my people and I'm going to support them. And now, after, more than 4 years, you're going into this fifth year, then,
Mhm.
and so what do you have now? But I think you also have a situation where you have the Washington Post and New York Times. You have all these big networks that used to be in Moscow. Now they're in
Mm.
Ukraine. And they
Right.
didn't move here because they felt like the coverage needed to be better. And the only way that they can improve is by being here. They were forced out of Moscow.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it was so, and Ukrainians have been complaining for years that you bring these people from Moscow, they bring their Moscow perspective. You see it in the reporting, and
Mhm.
and so the only reason that changed is because Russia no longer allowed them to cover Russia, and now they're here. And so, what does that
Mhm.
again say about the decision makers and media? It was a business decision. It was a decision that was based on logistics. Um, I'm just really thrown off by how cold and callous the industry is. And I think what formats like this do is it allows us to create a space where people could come who actually have a love for the country. One of my
Mhm.
favorite podcasts is All the Smoke, where you got
Mm.
Matt Barnes, and then there's another guy, Jackson. I forgot his first name, but at any rate, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because these are two former basketball players, and you could tell, they're not trained journalists exactly, but they do
Sometimes
excellent.
that's a benefit.
I was getting ready to say that's their benefit, because these people are just there to talk about the love of the game. And they
Mhm.
actually have their expertise, which is based on their experience of being players. And they have great conversations that a trained traditional journalist could never have. And so
Right.
so the good news is that you have alternative media sources like people on Substack and YouTube, who I think bring more context than mainstream media people. And the only thing I would like to close out with is, I think there's the lack of diversity in media is actually hurting Ukraine, because I wish I wasn't the only person covering Ukraine with the lens that I have, because and a lot of people who follow my work know that I cover Ukraine from a racial lens.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for example, one story that I'm working on right now is the one her name is Irina Korb,
Mm.
something like that. And so she was a woman in San Francisco who's been in the United States for more than 10 years. And ICE uh, detains her at the airport, at San Francisco airport.
Mhm.
And the name of the title, the title of this article, and it's dropping in the next 2 to 3 hours, is called um, Irina Korb's detention by ICE proves that Ukrainians aren't white like you think they are. And that lens is important, because
Mhm.
it shows you that MAGA doesn't care, because MAGA cared about that Irina Zaruska woman because a black dude killed her.
Right. Right.
But this Ukrainian woman,
But no air defense for her people.
but no air defense for our people. But then you take this Irina woman who was detained by ICE very brutally, by mind you, and the
Yeah.
video
Yeah.
that captured her brutal detainment was recorded by a black woman who was a councilwoman in the nearby city of Richmond, by the way. So that's interesting. Like, a black woman pulled out her phone
Mhm.
and she
Mhm.
captured that. There's a lot of symbolism in that. Okay.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
you need more people to understand culture, because
Mhm.
military analysis is excellent. We need that. We also need people who are looking at this from a cultural lens, because I think that gap or lack of cultural nuance and understanding is what caused analysts to underestimate Ukraine's capacity to stand up and defend themselves. But we consider culture and language to be soft skills, and the
Yeah,
military
exactly. It's
guys
stupid.
are the hard skill guys, which is idiotic. But
Which
yeah,
is
that's
weird
my.
because Green Berets. I have a former, well, he's still a friend. I haven't seen him in years. A friend who's a former Green Beret, and we went to lunch years ago before working on a project. He goes, "Well, do you know what Green Berets actually do?" Uh, and my instinct is always to shut up and go, "No, tell me." Even if I think I do, even if I think I have a bazillion words in my head, so I go, "I'm going to shut up and I want to hear the answer." He goes, "We're the first diplomats. We're the
Yeah.
first ones who sit in a tent and say, 'What do you need? You want a water well? Yeah. So if I get a water well, then you'll
Hmm.
talk to this guy? Yeah.'" He goes, "Everyone thinks like Rambo and all those things. No, what we do is," and I really love that he did that, because what he was saying is we have to train in the nuances of these tribes, or these groups and things that people kind of underestimate before they go in there and do it. But I want to draw a corollary to, it's also in the news I mentioned before you came on, because I said it was itching at me, and we were only on for a few minutes before you came in, so there's not much of it was able to be
Hmm.
said. But this discussion that's happening in North Africa on the edge of Morocco, with a enclave city that's been occupied by first the Portuguese, then the Spanish, and now the Spanish are having the Schengen zone threats thrown at them by Italy because, oh my God, the Muslims could come through and they'll wind up in Europe. And my rant was a little bit different, and it's in the line of what you're saying. I go, huh. As far as I'm concerned, that enclave is actually colonial occupation. So,
Hmm.
oh no, you don't understand. Okay. So, but it's 600 years. Well, the Amazigh people are 22,000 years contiguous history there. So 22,000 years history versus 600 is like what the King of England recently said just the other day. Um, but more importantly, the amount of intensity that gets fought back to protect the Spanish interest there. And but it was handed over. That was the Portuguese settlers and the Spanish who agreed to do the following, not the Amazigh. Yeah, but Morocco, look what Morocco's doing in Westerns. I mean, it's just the amount of intensity they put into, instead of going, "Fuck, you're right." That no one stops and just goes, "Gee, I hadn't thought about the colonial lens," because they don't see the colonial lens. They don't even see it. They're not instinctively, like, I'm wired to do that. I have an instinct. Go, what's really going on there? Yeah. Oh, who were
Why
the
do you
first
think?
people there?
Why do you think they aren't wired to see the colonial lens?
Exactly, because it benefits them. They like the lens. They're immune to it because it's the lens that gives them the power they have. It's white supremacy,
Yeah, it is. But I think
European
that, yeah,
supremacy.
no, I totally get it. And I think, and I asked you that because people don't realize that white supremacy, particularly as it's functioning in the United States with Trump,
Hmm.
no one thought that it would extend beyond people who look like me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they also don't, and people also don't understand that there are different types of supremacy. I even I actually use a lot of framing like Russian supremacy, for example. I mean, that's
Sure,
one.
sure.
I've heard, a few of my friends have used this terminology when describing um, the ways with which Russia wages its war, because it's not only based on
Hmm.
their fake, um, their fake lies about security. It's not just about that. It's about Russians generally hating Ukrainians because they exist. And you could describe Russians' hatred for Ukraine in the same way that white people have supremacist views towards Black people. It functions differently with white people in America. Racist white people is about hating us for who we are, how we look. Here in Ukraine, it's a matter of your culture doesn't exist, right?
Hmm.
You don't
Hmm.
exist. Your language
Hmm.
is some pigeon language bullshit. So,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
but the supremacist nature of it, which is to conquer you, which is to erase you, is coming from the same playbook. And
Right, right.
I think that we need to have more interdisciplinary study into how white supremacy and Russian supremacy are aligned, and
Hmm.
how like the American supremacist structure is, in the case of Trump, not only hurts minorities and frankly everybody that's not a rich white male,
Hmm.
um, and how it goes beyond these groups of people and how it can fall into U.S. foreign policy, as what we're seeing right here with the case of these missiles. Because the only reason
Right.
why Ukraine doesn't have these missiles is because Trump is feeding Americans white supremacist deal to say that we don't need all that money going over there. Keep it here. The welfare queen insult that was
Mm-hmm.
directed at Ukrainians was primarily targeted towards Black people and popularized by Ronald Reagan. And so you would
Exactly.
never think that that term would be used to somebody who looks white. But it
Right.
was because white supremacy is flexible in its hatred and disdain
Mm.
and its harm.
Let me tell you to the for our last 20 minutes here or so. Let me tell you to something that happened this
Mhm.
last week that I thought was amazing and breathtaking. Um, on Friday, I saw the march from Shevchenko Park to the Ivan Franko Theater, where the
Mhm.
protests have been happening. But literally down Kershak, something I did not get to see in 2014, which I've done live streams even for my supporters on Signal, where I get like 8 people watching at once. I go, "This is Kershak. You see all the way down there, and it's empty. It was just traffic. It was a normal day with light traffic." No, during a year of Maidan, and I'm going to imagine it because I'm not there. It was all the way down there, and it was all the way down. Well, last Friday, I literally got to see that. I got to see people as far as my camera could reach, and then as they passed me, I finally stopped and let a lot of people go past me to film the end of the line, and it was like there is no end of this line. They keep going. Oh my God, how many people are here today? 10,000 people approximately popped out on Friday. And you went and talked to people and did videos with interviews with people. And what I want to really hone in on right now is that even this afternoon, I saw a response to Sean Penner's article about us being at the protest in the march. And someone again saying, this is not about Fedorov. These people are confused. They're just trying to blah, 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 fill in the blanks. They didn't, whoever it is, never talked to anyone here. They don't know anyone in the crowd. Like when I was down in the South and I see you interviewing, all I got to know is Terrell's interviewing because then I know everything that goes with that. If it's Yarek, Rick the Ukrainian, if it's other people doing, I know who's there and I know who they're talking to, and I can get a feel, even though I'm in Dnipro, at a different protest. I'm at Mykolaiv at a different protest because we filmed and streamed from those. And the same commentary was from those. Man, we want our future. We're tired of the corruption. We're tired of the stagnant Soviet leadership of the military. Fuck Sersky. And these are normal people who are just frustrated with the war. And
But
more
who wrote this
importantly,
article that
it's
you're
an
talking
expression.
about?
Say again?
Who wrote this article
No, I'm
that you're
saying
talking about?
no, I'm saying so. First, Sean wrote an article basically exemplifying what happened. I'm saying there's a
Yeah,
commentator class out there that think
got
they
you.
love Ukraine, who are telling all of us who live here it was a manufactured synthetic thing that's a really Russian op. And these people are so confused. They have they have no sense of understanding the crowd right in front of us. And the reason why it bothers me is sort of like what you just said about the racism. Ukrainians go out right now today and say, "This is what I believe." And somewhere in America go, "I don't think so. I think what's really happening is blah, 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 blah." And they don't really listen to anyone. They don't listen to Ukrainians. They don't give a fuck what Ukrainians say. They're going to tell Ukrainians what to think.
It's the
Ukrainians are
internet in a
still little
nutshell.
people. Yeah.
It's the
But the
internet in a
addition, I think
nutshell.
the addition, I think it's the internet, but I think additionally, there's an arrogance about what Ukrainians should do from people who've never lived through this. And some of it is white voices, in my opinion. It's people you've never suffered. Wait a minute, you've never been in this situation. Interesting. Okay, that's what's really missing. And see, I have, or I relate to it from my own background. I have a background that's similar enough to go, no, I get it. I get it. So
But
that
do you also
disconnect.
think, yeah, but do you, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish. I was going to ask you a
No, no,
question.
go. I'm done. I'm done with my thought.
But do you also think a lot of it is, when people come in and say, well, this is an op or what have you, that it's just their own hubris? Because
Partly, yeah.
I was speaking to a DSA guy, for example, yesterday, not yesterday, but a few days ago, because I'm actually trying to
Right.
build, relationships with people on that political side, because there
Sure.
are people
Sure.
who have, there are some people who are good on Ukraine in that
Hmm.
group. They just,
Yeah.
their
Sure.
voices are just not as publicized as the most ridiculous ones, right?
Right, right.
So basically, I was trying to talk to this guy who's nice enough. Not and this guy obviously pro Israel, not pro Israel, but pro Palestine, whatever. So am I. Um,
Right.
I was trying to find a foundation where the two of us could agree on something, and we agreed on
Mhm.
Palestine. So I'm like, okay, just as you give Palestinians agency, and I don't say Hamas, 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 Hamas,
Right,
Hamas
right, right, right.
every damn time. Like, why is it that anytime we talk about Ukrainian agency, talk about Ukrainians doing something, that the Americans are always involved, or that there's
Mhm.
some op going on? Ukrainians can't make decisions on their own without being controlled. And when I try to revert it and say, how would you feel if somebody took strip Palestinians or group of people that you care about of their agency? And they didn't see the connection. I think the reason being, and again, it's not even an insult to the person. There are some
Sure.
people who are just so ideologically passionate about what they believe, and it's a genuine critique of neoliberalism and white supremacy and and how unfair the rules based order is. Like, I understand
Mhm.
all of that, but he made it up in his mind that the USSR, the reason why it fell, it was because of the West. Never mind the activism going on internally, but he
Mhm.
looks upon it fondly. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that because he looks at the USSR as a nation that was socialist, which it wasn't.
Mm.
Um,
Right, right.
as a socialist nation that could have thrived had the U.S. not intervened. Never mind the fact that it was a dysfunctional structure to begin with. Never mind the fact
Mhm.
that these people were forced into this union by gunpoint. Um, I was basically telling him that you care about one type of oppression, but you intellectually aid and abet another, right?
Right.
So a lot of these DSA types in their thinking are not necessarily any better than the people that they critique. And I think, going back to your point, you just have a whole bunch of people who arrogantly take positions without really doing the work. Because I bring up the DSA people because I just have a lot of harsh, strong, not harsh, but really strong critiques of them. Um,
Because I think
and
it's closer to our politic. It's actually we already dismissed that other far right fascist politics, so we got to deal with
right.
the side that's the unspoken allies. Like I was at Pacifica Radio, so essentially, it was about 3 months ago. I was probably brought on a Zoom call with Howie Hawkins, former Green Party candidate. I was
Hmm.
stunned how many people were so pro Ukraine in that crowd that
Oh,
I could have
really?
just written off. I was totally. I was like, man, why am I going to be in this call? And a mutual friend says, please come on the call. I said, okay, so and I had made a mission. I even called out on this program and in my back in my own audience, old audience. I said, I need more of our old people to talk to because some of you got some fucked up shit in your head. So turns out when I got on the air, they were really, really in tune. And they only had one guy who goes, what about the Nazis? And everyone goes, let Chris respond. And I didn't really get to respond. I actually responded to one other comment and I didn't get to tear the other guy apart. So I wrote a huge article aimed at that guy and Howie Hawkins and these guys. Well, they loved it, like these very lefty activist types. They like, oh man, we were overdue for that. But why was I able to do it? Because I was talking about my own community. I was talking about a community I had served in activism from the age of 16, anti-apartheid death penalty to modern times, that they had some adjustment to me making about the way they spoke about Ukraine, spoke about military, spoke about the current situation, but more importantly, how they speak about Russia. Which let me draw it into a question because I think this is extremely important about something you and I share. As an interest for different
Hmm.
reasons. African liberation through the 70s was really driven a lot by America's betrayal, being racist as fuck, and Russia exploiting those fissures for its strategic gains. But Russia didn't become sympathetic to the African cause. Russia engages in state capture through Wagner right now. And so you really said it best about how someone in the left idealizes Russia, and I think that the reason was it seemed to be a counterbalance to the evils of America's racist failures, which is why the whataboutism, have you hung your Negroes lately, from the Soviets had such power in America because we knew we were racist. And so the lefties go, well, Russia's got it. And then instead you got to go, no, they don't. It's cynical what they do in Africa. They don't give a fuck about the outcome of people in Africa, you know?
Russia rapes and pillages, literally rapes and pillages, sexually
Right.
assaults children,
Yeah, yeah.
in towns that they take over for their natural resources. If you read the work of Philip Obaji Jr., he's a
I love
Nigerian
Philip.
journalist, and he
Yeah,
documents Russian crimes all across Africa. And
right.
he was tortured for some of his work
That's right.
by Wagner affiliated military groups. And but here's the thing, Chris, these people don't give a fuck. That's really the bottom
Right.
line, and because it's not their fight. And I'm saying it like this because so much of what I do and what I try to the community. Not only am I doing journalism and essays, I'm doing this to build community.
Amen.
And what does it mean for all of us as human beings to actively engage in each other's humanity and safety and self-determination?
Hmm.
And there's an article I'm writing that's going to come out probably tomorrow or Wednesday. It's about a Black jazz musician who went to Moscow recently to
Mm-hmm.
perform, and he was harshly criticized. And just to put a pin on it and get to the point of the article, do I wish that guy not played in Moscow? Yeah, I wish he wouldn't play there. However, because I'm a pro-Ukraine guy,
Right, right.
but in order to have a conversation with this jazz performer, Nicholas Payton is his name, and I'm not putting
Mm,
him out because this is all on social media and Instagram.
sure.
Um, I have a more nuanced reaction because someone asked me to write about it, and I said, okay, this is interesting for me. What it means to be in each other's shared humanity means that Black people are constantly tugged at and pulled to the left and to the right and to the front and to the back about where our allegiances need to be from people who have a track record of giving a damn about us,
That's right.
right? And so for the Ukrainians, my nuanced conversation is going to be something to the effect of, if we want Black people to stand in solidarity with Ukrainians, that means that Ukrainians are going to have to do similar work that I have done, which
Hmm.
means listening, embedding yourself in community, and understanding what liberation looks like for them, and understanding what their struggles have been, and understanding the fact that, you know, Europe is standing with you, but they still have not paid reparations to Africa, and neither has
Right.
America. And then also, Black people, we know how to protest. We know how to stand in solidarity. Black people stood in solidarity with South Africa, right? Black people, Black activists
Amale Sizwe. I'm still
have
that guy.
yeah, have dated back. And Black people have, if you go back to the '60s, have been in
Right.
solidarity with Palestine. And in the Black Lives
Right.
Matter
Yes.
movement, you know that Palestinians actually helped and provided support, not support, well, support and advice on how to deal with cops and tear gas and beatings and et cetera. And so
Right. Right.
those are very intimate experiences that have earned a lot of respect from Black activists. And
Hmm.
so if we want so when we talk about this collective safety and security, that requires us to really disarm ourselves of our biases and our
Hmm.
accusations and take time to
Hmm.
learn. Because at the end of the day, the way that these supremacist structures and hegemons, whether it be China with the Uyghurs, or whether it be Russia with the Ukrainians and everyone else, and whether it be America with pretty much every damn body in the same similar dynamic
The
with,
North Africans and the French and Spanish,
right? Because there are going to be
Portuguese.
situations where I'm pro Ukraine, I'm pro Palestine,
Hmm.
But for example, you have somebody like Alexander Usyk, who is in Saudi Arabia and takes fights in Riyadh, even though we know that that government is responsible for the murder of a journalist. And so,
Right.
so the way that we choose which sides and when is going to always shift and change. And so, my point of bringing up this black jazz musician is that
Hmm.
we're all not going to be in solidarity with everybody all the time. And it's because the way that these countries and their supremacist constructs are set up, they're designed for us to be constantly at odds with each other at some point.
Good point.
And
Good point.
so, and going back to my point is that we have to have the emotional and intellectual dexterity to understand that and
Hmm.
realize that and approach these conversations with care. And
Hmm.
so I don't begrudge Ukrainians for trying to build relationships with Israel because
Yeah.
of their positioning, even though we know Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't give a damn about anyone but himself. And so
Hmm.
these conversations are going to require nuance that the pop tart culture of social media doesn't give us. But unfortunately, because people are not like the two of us who sit here and devote their time to places like this, it's just easy to be lazy and think that we have the ideas and spout a whole bunch of BS on Twitter or wherever that we have no idea about what we're talking about.
Right. Well, just like my comment this morning when all I did was I threw the comment about 2 lines that, that this enclave town is, a product of colonialism. Was I
Hmm.
throwing a Molotov cocktail or a Banderaschi schmoozy into the room?
Yeah.
Yes, because I'm tired of colonial mindset ignoring the facts. And it didn't like someone asked me, "Did we know who provided trucks to bring 60,000?" I don't care. I really don't care. What I care about is that we understand that subcurrent and that the silenced people are heard. And one of the things of living here, and I think this is so important that you and I do live here to see this, is that the more I lived here, the more I began to understand, like, holy shit, I do know what it's like. Maybe not as a person, but I mean, I've talked to enough Ukrainians. I know what it's like to have a people that have been run over by history, left and right, up and down, no matter what, and finally put their head up, and they get shouted back down the moment they stick their head up from, Ukrainians. And I mentioned this in our last conversation about the Polish aggression, when Woodrow Wilson literally had in 1919 had an entire report that completely whitewashed everything that happened to Ukrainians because
Hmm.
now we wanted a stable Poland. And then we did it again in World War II. And we did it again. We keep doing it where someone is expendable compared to our strategic goals. Well, I'm
Yeah.
wired differently as a journalist. My wiring goes, who was the expendable one in this? So I actually
Yeah.
start from a whole different matrix. So when a story goes, wait a minute, okay, I know what the above story is. The above story is, but what's the underneath story? Because someone here is not getting heard. And I come from Houston's political black community, so I had people who raised me to pay attention to the voices of the silenced ones. And I'll use a local example. When I go to the Defender rallies, I always try to find the mom, the wife, or someone who's standing there,
What does Defender mean? Tell people
obviously by
Defender.
themselves. So our POW rallies here for the Save Azov and
Gotcha.
captured defenders. So I always try to find that one person or two people in the crowd who are just standing there in shock with their family photo up, and no one's hugging them. And they don't have a little pod. They're not with like one of the units groupings. They're just kind of there, and they're fucking lost. And I'll walk up to them, Dobry din, jak was звати? Maria, it's a vaccine, yeah. Uh, my name is Varte Christopher, and I just open up, and the world comes open a little bit for a person who's fucking suffering. Right?
Mm.
And I think as a journalist, the wiring should be that. That's what a real journalist should be doing, is seeking out not to talk to Zelensky, no offense to Zelensky, but to
Sure.
seek out people who really need that microphone added in their community or their home to do that. And I think you're one of the few people here that are really I know will do that. That's what I
Yeah,
know you will
man.
do that someone else is not going to be doing the same way.
Yeah, I definitely do, man. And I appreciate that. Before I get off, I want to tell somebody a quick fun story about safety. So look at
Yeah,
this,
let's do it.
guys.
Then we
Look
go.
at this knife, right? Um, in New York, this would be illegal. I could be arrested, but I was on
Ah,
Hudashot, the main street here, and filming, and some random guy walks up to me and says, what are you doing? And I said, I am making a video about Ukraine. He said, is this in promotion of Ukraine? I said, yes. And he gifted me this.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, these are,
yeah,
so when you talk about safety, people can walk
yeah,
around with these and it's totally legal.
yeah, yeah.
But you don't, but crimes here are low. I never worry about someone trying to stab. Anyway, that before I
Yeah,
run off, man, I just wanted to let people know that. And as a
likewise.
nice little holder
Yeah,
for it
bro.
and
I love
everything.
it.
But yeah, but I could walk around with this and not worry, but about anyone stabbing me with something similar. But yeah, before I get off, that's what I wanted to say. And by the way, I want to say
Well,
hello to everybody. And I keep, for some reason, the lighting is messed up, so I can't see people's names. So I see Kim and I see
yeah,
Laura and I see Jessica and Leslie, and Martin's been saying a lot.
great people here
You know,
today.
yeah, there are a lot of great people. And for those who are in Kim Beckett, please support Chris in my work. If you aren't a paid subscriber, please consider it. It's what we do primarily. But anyway, man, I want to thank you for having me on as always.
Likewise, it's a mutual cooperation, and we'll be here every Monday to share with what's going on. Don't miss Terrell's articles. I, I can tell you one day I will sit down with Terrell and I will do a more formal interview with you where I literally, you'll be the feature guy. And partially because I'm very thankful we didn't have you blown up in mines just north of Zoom that time. I never forget that.
Yeah, oh yeah, we have to talk about that the
Surely,
next call. Yeah,
minutes.
you have to talk about
One of
that
the
the
things
next
I want to
call. Yeah,
can we let's agree with this. What I'd like to talk about next week with you, because I think you and I could have a great exploration of this, is what I said uh how can you stop a genocide if you have tickets to the Bolshoi concept? So we'll chat about what these
let's talk about
the
that.
cultural hook, how we keep like yeah, but they got a movie out. It's not the movie guy's fault that the war is happening. It's not the ballet guy's fault. So we'll talk about that. But everyone, again, follow and subscribe. Paid subscriptions help. And I want to say what I said to someone on the phone recently. When you hear that Terrell's raising a certain amount of number, is because he's putting that up so he knows that all of those objectives are met. He's definitely not an influencer. You don't have that. You're a scholar. You really apply a deep understanding of this region and this country, and you do the work. And people need to get behind that. And they may not see that you're at different lectures that are not publicized. You're in meetings that are how you both learn
Hmm.
and impart your wisdom, and people here can help do that. So hey, take care, Tita Nebel. We hope we have a very quiet night tonight. I
Hope
never
so.
know, but
Yeah, take
дякую,
care.
bro.
Yeah,
До побачення.
thank you for watching me.
And to
Yeah,
everyone else, we will see you again soon. I'm going to sign off as well. I got things to do. Catch you throughout the week. Слава
yeah.
Україні, героям слава і пиздець Російській Федерації.